Good afternoon or good morning, depending on where you're joining us from. I'm Sabina Vaught, and welcome to the second talk in this spring series of dialogues with our guests whose experience and knowledge will support all of us in deepening our understanding of the very long struggle for a free Palestine and the right of return, and against the ongoing US-Israeli colonization, occupation, settlement, and genocide, a century in the making and horrifically accelerated over the last several months with new terrifying threat to the people now in Rafah. Before we get started, I want to give many thank yous to my most wonderful colleagues from the Center for Urban Education, Elon Dancy, Executive Director, Christy McGuire, Community Engagement Program Manager, and Emily Conklin, Center Administrator. They're supporting this event in all the ways imaginable. Thank you also to Caitlin Zerker for tech support, to many colleagues and friends who helped shape the series, and everyone who helped to circulate the event widely. Thanks to all of you who are here with us today to learn. We're focusing today on organizing and activism in and with the Palestinian liberation struggle. I'm so excited to be welcoming Lara Kiswani with AROC and Ahmad Abuznaid with USCPR. So I'll start with Lara Kiswani, who is Executive Director of the Arab Resource and Organizing Center, AROC, whose mission is to, quote, organize to fight for racial and economic justice and the dignity and liberation of our Arab and Muslim communities. We work toward the self-determination of our people under attack in Palestine, Yemen, Iraq, Syria, Egypt, and across the Swana region, with the same breath that we fight for our freedoms here in the United States. We see our struggles here as a domestic manifestation of global militarism and racial capitalism, and as the root causes of the political, social, and economic instability of our homelands. In that spirit, we see the liberation of our people as inextricably tied to the liberation of all oppressed people, end quote. Lara has worked as a youth and adult educator, is a member of the Critical Resistance Advisory Board, and is a lecturer at San Francisco State University. Lara, we're so grateful to have you joining us today.
Thanks for having me.
Ahmad Abuznaid is Executive Director of the U.S. Campaign for Palestinian Rights. USCPR describes its work as, quote, a political home for all who believe that freedom for the Palestinian people is an integral part of achieving our collective liberation. We provide resources and strategic support to the US-based Palestine Solidarity Movement, channeling grassroots power into positive change in US policy and public opinion. We work with local organizers and activists, policymakers, movement leaders, media, and advocacy organizations to advance a rights-based accountability and justice-oriented framework from the US to Palestine, end quote. Prior to joining USCPR, Ahmed co-founded the Florida-based Dream Defenders after the killing of Trayvon Martin, serving as legal and policy director and COO during his time there. Ahmed went on to lead the National Network for Arab American Communities as the executive director from 2017 to 2019. Ahmed, thank you so very much for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
So we'll start by, and you can decide who goes first, but asking you all to share your personal stories of being involved in formal organizing. So where did it start? Where are the many places it might have started? What were the many factors, familial to global? And sort of what have you learned along the way that you want to share with people on the call today?
Lara, تفضلي.
Nice voluntolding. Well, I can't start with my journey to political work or organizing without just grounding it in my entire identity. So I'm the daughter and granddaughter of Palestinian refugees. I was the first of my siblings and family to be born in the United States. And I come from a working class, immigrant, Arab, Muslim, Palestinian family. So all of that shapes my identity. It shapes my values. It also implanted in me a deep understanding of social and economic injustice and a commitment to fighting it. And I think the politicization of my identity really started in school, and which is why my background is actually in education, because I had a deep commitment to engaging in the public education to transform lives, given how much of an impact and a devastating impact it could have on many people's lives. Like many Palestinians born and raised in the US, I didn't see myself in textbooks or in the curriculum. I was told by my teachers, my country doesn't exist. I learned like from a really young age that to be Palestinian was a political act in of itself. And that my identity and asserting my identity was actually resisting erasure, colonialism, and challenging racism. So I recall in school, in high school, my US teacher, high school social studies teacher, photocopying Howard Zinn and handing it out, and us having to return it at the end of the semester because she would get in trouble if she had done that and not gone by the textbook curriculum. And I remember learning from Howard Zinn, learning from I Bury My Heart at Wounded Knee, watching documentaries on the war on Vietnam, the Black Power movement, the Chicano student movement. And it was actually learning about those social movements that I began to see myself. I started to understand the relationship between my Palestinian identity and broader global justice movements, but also the third world liberation struggles and the broader global South. And it taught me about my life, my people, my history, and my ability and my agency in this fight for human dignity and freedom for all people. So that's really, I think, where I became politicized and wanted to do different. And it's why I'm a student of ethnic studies, why I teach in ethnic studies, and why I'm a deep commitment to transformative education in the public education field for all people. Fast forward to being a college student, I found myself in the early 2000s in college, and we had the Intifada of 2000. So we were leading the work around Palestine solidarity. I was a student at UC Davis and co-founded Students for Justice in Palestine. And after immersing ourselves into trying to stop the war in Afghanistan, stop the war in Iraq, I found my mentorships were feminists, were internationalists, those who were at the front lines of the anti-apartheid struggle of South Africa, Palestinians who happened to have been at the front lines of the apartheid South Africa movement, those who challenged coups in Central America. So all of those, that mentorship, the feminist scholars and activists helped me understand my struggle and my role within the Palestine movement as what people called an intersectional struggle, right? But from a radical perspective, an international struggle. And it is from there, like learning when June Jordan penned, I was born a Black woman and now I've become Palestinian, right? That is what shaped my identity and what organizing meant when it comes to Palestine, that anyone's freedom struggle is everyone's freedom struggle. So, from an early on for me, I was a student activist and engaged in campaigns and did community work and built across different third world struggles. And I realized, and I still now know, that organizing works. So, when I came into AROC as the executive director, being able to support a local grassroots organization serving and organizing poor and working class Arabs and Muslims in the backyard that I grew up in, the San Francisco Bay Area, I was humbled to take on this role, but I also understood from early on in my life, the necessity to build power and center the leadership of those most impacted. And to do that in a way that builds across movements, but also shifts the conditions, right, that we find ourselves in towards a different future. And throughout the various campaigns and work that I've done over the years and been a part of and lucky and fortunate to learn from, I think the lesson here is that organizing does work. And it's often the hard, unrecognized, invisible labor of those most impacted, of women, queer people, young people, the day-to-day organizing that they engage in. That's not the sexy work that people see of, on the screens, the deepening of relationships, developing relationships, building really, difficult and building coalitions across different organizations and movements, engaging in a variety of tactics, some that you don't necessarily want to engage in, developing strategy and reassessing strategy and balance of forces. That's ultimately the reason why we are able to make the gains we see in our movement. It's actually why we find ourselves in the moment we're in today. It's why we're able to build power, to shift power, and it really starts both at a local level in coordination and in conjunction with national, international frameworks and relationships and work. And that, to me, is the biggest lesson, is that we have to understand that the grassroots organizing on the local level has to inform and shape national work. And similarly, there is no distinction between what's happening in the quote unquote borders of the United States and what's happening across the world. As you read the mission statement of AROC and talked in the mission statement of US campaign, clearly our worldview is that we are not confined to artificial borders, that organizing requires us to understand ourselves as part of a global community fighting against racial capitalism and imperialism and its domestic manifestations. And lastly, that not just organizing works, but as students of history, we know that we often hear in the moment, issues are too complicated and it's impossible to vision something different, right? So at the height of the anti-apartheid struggle of South Africa, they said South Africa was too complicated. At some point, French colonization of Algeria was too complicated. At some point, Jim Crow South was just too complicated. At the height of these struggles, it was unpopular to believe that we could put an end to apartheid, right? An end to segregation, an end to colonization, that people had the capacity to liberate themselves. And what we know today is that in fact, that's not true, right? So the things that were at one point too complicated are understood today as common sense issues. And a lesson for all of us engaged in organizing or movement building in this moment around Palestine, as students of history, to remind ourselves that we can win, we will win, and that we have to engage in the hard, unrecognized work of organizing in order to get there. I think that's your cue, Ahmed.
I think that, yeah, thank you for that. That was
I thought we should just give a moment. You dropped a lot of bars, a lot of brilliance. Thank you, Lara. I think we can all go home now. My name is Ahmad Abuznaid, and I was born in Jerusalem. I'm Palestinian, with family from El Khalil, which in English is pronounced Hebron. Many folks know El Khalil as one of the most violent areas with Israeli settlers, routinely going on incursions into different Palestinian villages and lands. And one of the most prominent examples of that we're seeing in this current moment is Masafer Yatta. A lot of eyes on Masafer Yatta as settlers and Israeli military continue to enact violence on the local population to continue the Nakba of 75 plus years ago, right? And I think that's an important point when we think about the genocide that we're currently witnessing, is that it's in Gaza, but it's also all across the West Bank, and it's connected to the Nakba from 75 plus years ago, the original ethnic cleansing to depopulate the land of Palestine, of its Palestinian population, so that they could repopulate it with a majority Jewish population in founding the state of Israel. I was born in Jerusalem, but my parents at the age of 1 were able to bring me to the US, where I grew up the first few years of my life in South Florida. And very similar to Lara, working class family, and my father was a professor back home. My mother, would work in retail. And I remember that at age 5, 6, 7, I just, I just didn't see, I think, the ugliness of the US. I remember thinking like the US was this very, very like, how do I say, perfect place, but it really was in comparison to what I witnessed when I went back home to Palestine. So that's kind of how I started to view the US as like this ideal fantasy land. When I was 7, my parents decided to bring me back to Palestine, and for the first time, I was strip searched alongside my mother in the Israeli airport, Tel Aviv Ben Gurion. This was the first time I had traveled back since leaving at age 1. So that was like a memory that sticks with you. And over the years there, I began to, experience what life was like for the typical young kid living under occupation. Checkpoints were routine to and from school. Curfews, what's known as mamnu' al-tajawwal or mana' al-tajawwal, basically no movement. And the Israelis would enforce these curfews for all sorts of reasons. When they were looking for someone, they just wanted to, subjugate us. But also when there perhaps could be an uprising of sorts. One of the memories that sticks out to me from my childhood is the fact that there was a settler from Brooklyn, New York, in 1994 that settled in Al-Khalil in Hebron and committed a vicious massacre in the Ibrahimi Mosque in Al-Khalil during the holy month of Ramadan during morning prayers. He walked in and fired upon worshipers, murdering over 30, injuring over 100. And I remember at that time I was about 10 years old, and I wondered, aloud to my parents, since we didn't have a military or a police force, I remember asking if the Israeli military would then, help us in this moment. It was clear to me that some force needed to provide protection in these sorts of instances, but also as we face occupation. And then I kind of recognized again, because systemically, under Zionism, Israeli lives matter exponentially more than Palestinian lives. And not only do they matter more, but Palestinian lives are sort of an inconvenience to Zionism, to the Israeli state, to the occupation. So no Israeli soldiers did not come to help us. And in fact, what we experienced was a man'at tajawwal. And so for 2 weeks, I could not go outside to play. I couldn't go to school, couldn't see my friends. You basically had to stay indoors at all times, and you needed to be prepared for the Israeli forces to come in, raid your place, look for people, look for things, ask you questions. You all have seen probably, videos of this stuff, all across social media. But some of these memories really stuck with me because once I came back to the US, I was then able to see, like, without the blinders, systemic racism in the US. It really took for me, going back to Palestine and kind of having these different experiences to come back and start to question things, start to question why certain classmates based on race were treated differently when they were class clowns. Some class clowns were able to get away with things. And the darker your hue, the less you were able to get away with certain, tomfoolery, whatever you'd call it. As a young kid, you're just, kind of acting up, trying to get some laughs out of your classmates. I started to see criminalization even in middle school, where some of these kids would go from making a basic joke to not only principal's office to the school resource officer disciplining them. So I think like that stuck with me. And when I got to college, I started to gain, I think, an interest in activism, not through Palestine, but through other means. So, as many folks probably on this call or have been on this call throughout their time have been engaged in student government. I started my trajectory in student government. I remember some of the first campaigns that meant a lot to me were like keeping the computer lab open for students and keeping printing free, like those items. And then there was a young Black boy named Martin Lee Anderson that was actually mysteriously died in a juvenile boot camp about a couple hours away from Tallahassee, where I went to college. And we took interest to the case because we started to hear stories of a cover-up. And then we saw footage of actual boot camp guards beating Martin Lee Anderson to death as he collapsed. And then going back, looking at the autopsy reports that stated that Martin Lee Anderson died due to complications from sickle cell anemia. And I started to learn from my Black comrades that didn't add up, right? So now we saw the video, we knew the true cause of death. At that point in time, we were driven to action. Students from FAMU, which is a HBCU right next to Florida State, where I went to school, and Tallahassee Community College, we all came together and we went to occupy the governor's office. And at the time, the governor was Jeb Bush. And so, if I could just borrow a bit of inspiration from Lara when she talked about the connections between imperialism abroad and racism here. This guy, Jeb Bush, was the governor of Florida, and he was in Iraq when we went to occupy his office because he was going to support his brother's illegal, devastating occupation of Iraq. And so we not so kindly told him he needed to get his ass back to Florida and govern because there was a young black boy that was murdered by the state under his watch. And there were people that were demanding justice. And so that's kind of the lens that I really started to look at this movement through, is that like it's all connected. And when we see intense criminalization here, and when we see intense brutalization here, it also has a connection abroad. In Ferguson, we saw this happen organically when folks, were exchanging stories over Twitter with how to deal with tear gas canisters, right? But it's not just that, right? It's Cop City, it's police getting trained by IDF troops on counterterrorism in Israel, right? It's all of these connections that we see quite clearly today, in addition to the fact that it's our tax dollars, while we're being told that there's not enough money to forgive student loans. There's not enough money to make sure we have health insurance. There's not enough money for the homeless people that you and I see every single day when we walk across cities in America. It's all a connected system. So those are some of the lessons that I started to learn really as I engaged in my activism over the years. And, just one fine point also to tease out is that when we founded the Dream Defenders years later, after the murder of Trayvon Martin, so I come back together with so many of these comrades from college that we organized around Martin Lee. We came together for Trayvon, and two lessons actually tease out. The work has to continue. You need to build consistent and sustainable structures, right? So that the Laras of the world are continuing to develop and evolve in their organizing, but also like it's not just Lara, right? That's why AROC is such a powerful institution, because there's organizers and activists coming through and getting trained and developed. And so that consistency and that sustainable nature of what we require of our organizations and our infrastructure, I cannot overstate enough. And the second quick lesson that I'll tease out is that when we first founded the Dream Defenders, we marched from Bethune-Cookman in Daytona Beach, Florida, to Sanford, Florida, where Trayvon Martin was murdered. And it was 40 miles, and it was this beautiful march. And we really got to know each other prominently. It was really that deep relationship building over 3 days of marching. And so that was beautiful, that Lara was alluding to. But one lesson that we learned the hard way was that, you really need to start at the local level. And that's again why I so appreciate, AROC's work. Is like, without the local folks, the local working class folks, the local teachers, the local students, the local families, the moms and pops, it's not real. And so we marched all this way from Daytona Beach to Sanford. And while we did have some connections on the ground, what we found was a lot of folks were extremely frustrated with us that we hadn't coordinated with them. Folks that had been trying to make certain demands and make certain changes happen for years in their community were not brought in to be a part of the process. And so that's a lesson that we learned the hard way, that we made a mistake. And so, that was, I think, really, really helpful for us at Dream Defenders, but also me individually, for like, whenever anyone wants us to jump on a campaign or a cause or an issue, I need to make sure we're in conversation and rooted in relationship with the local folks. And not only is it incumbent upon us to do it because it's the right thing. These are the folks that also know where to go strategically. These are the folks that have learned all the lessons. They've tried the different options available to them. They've figured out how to move the chess pieces. And so we want to make sure that they're at the forefront of whatever change we're advocating for. So that's where I'll leave it for now. Back to you, Sabina.
Thank you both. So I want to try to tie together a few of the points you all made in just really beautiful detail. One is the way in which liberation struggles are intertwined, but also interdependent. So they need one another. So everyone's liberation struggle can win. And that oppressive systems are also interconnected. And, we had 2 weeks ago, Neda Elia and Nadine Neber talking a little bit about, the interconnection of oppression doesn't mean it'll look identical, but just because it doesn't look identical doesn't mean it's not part of the same sort of colonial, imperialist, anti-Black structures and systems and histories. And you all talked about a lot of that just again in such beautiful detail. So thank you for that. You finished by talking about, learning through the work, learning through mistakes. And I think that's something we've been trying to think about in a lot of different spaces and communities, and the sort of importance of building relationships, but also learning through error. And I'm wondering, as you get to that building relationships, building consistent and sustainable structures, if you all might talk about what you've learned and what you're learning through your current organizing efforts. So both organizations have just been doing this kind of incredible work that I'd love for people on the call to be able to hear about in some detail. And we'll drop links in the chat too, so you all can follow the work of the organizations. But if you all might talk about the current organizing efforts, sort of for and with Palestinian liberation, and how they draw from a long period of organizing and struggle that involves all the things you talked about, the sort of learning and building of relationships. And again, whoever would like to start, please jump in.
Well, yeah, I mean, I think right now we're witnessing, mass mobilizations on a really grand scale, and we can draw our inspiration from previous anti-war movements. We can draw our inspiration even from, the kind of the protests and the movement that was built up to oppose the war in Iraq. So these are like actually many of the folks that, we're in conversation with when we think about the strategy are folks who are a part of those different movements. Again, like, one of the other, I guess, lessons to tease out is we all need mentorship, and we all need to make sure that we're engaged with folks that have done it before, that have done it repeatedly, because they've had the trial and error. Also, sometimes, like when you're in the thick of things, right, you don't get that bird's eye view. When you're engaged in that day-to-day sort of struggle, you may not have the opportunity or the capacity to take a step back and think through that bird's eye view. So I think like keeping like a team of advisors and mentors and folks that have done it before is critical. And we're doing that today. And that's why you can see like, even if you look at the different tactics, right, we are seeing different sit-ins, whether in congressional offices, or, in district or in DC. You're seeing people shutting down the roads, shutting down bridges, and this is stuff, right? Like that when you think about the civil rights movement and the Edmund Pettus Bridge, and you think about Alabama and the way that those folks on Bloody Sunday decided to engage in an act of direct action that could possibly endanger them. And while the danger looks differently today, those are still some of the same risks that you take when you engage in acts of direct action or civil disobedience. We're also like thinking of what this means in relation to Congress, right? For us, the policies that actually dictate Israel and Palestine get passed through Congress. And so we're seeing a lot of folks take action in directing their anger, their frustration, and their advocacy towards Congress. And at the US campaign, we built some action tools that allowed for it to be super easy for folks to write letters to members of Congress or make calls to members of Congress. And we've had 1 million actions taken. So while that's amazing, because I think historically we used to hear about the Israeli lobby inundating offices with calls and letters and it being so overwhelming that, they're flooding the lines, but now that's us, right? We're doing that. That's this mass movement we're building that's way beyond Palestinian. It's Palestinian, it's Arab, it's Muslim, it's Black, it's indigenous, it's queer, right? It's Latino, it's undocumented, it's this really beautiful mass movement that we're building that we need to keep investing in and keep growing. But the questions, one of the questions we have to grapple with is, so all these folks, start to take action through online mechanisms. Well, how do we keep them involved? Because so many of these folks want to do more. And it's great to be able to do these actions from our phones, but so many folks are looking for more. And so we have to think through, like, what are the onboarding ramps? What are the pathways for these folks to stay clued in and stay plugged in? So that we can continue to really build this mass movement, this wide tent, but also to bring as many skill sets, as many artists, as many folks from labor, like all the folks from the different communities that we want to build with. These are also vehicles to bring them, into the movement in a much more profound way. So we want to think of, like, after they take action with us through these tools, what are the onboarding ramps? That's something we're like struggling with right now, right? Because in this moment, we've seen probably the greatest interest we've seen in this generation here in the US in Palestine, and the folks are ready. And we just want to make sure we're in conversation so that we can offer, clear next steps, action tools, items for folks to plug into so that they can be a part of this movement too.
Yeah, I would echo everything Ahmed said. I think we're all impressed, inspired, moved by the groundswell of support, solidarity, action being taken by everyone from every walk of life. And the US left is not prepared to engage and absorb this, let alone the Palestinian left, right? So I think we're in a moment of crisis around that, but that's a crisis of abundance. Like, we need to figure out how can we actually organize all these people who want to throw down for what is the central cause of the moment, right? So it's not just the biggest moment for Palestinian history. This is the issue of the moment today. And in terms of, like, what we're doing, I think Ahmed laid out sort of the infrastructural pieces. There's a legislative and advocacy pieces and just trying to get people activated. But in terms of, like, buckets, we could also describe this as, like, we are at war. So we are facing, this is an anti-war movement facing a genocidal war backed and made possible by the US government, by the government that we find ourselves calling our government, right? And then this is also a war of dehumanization. So there's this deep dehumanization of Palestinians and Arabs in this country, in this moment, that is justifying. That's what you can only justify genocide through dehumanization. So the way in which Palestinians are facing unprecedented levels of dehumanization. And we've lived through 9/11, we recall that. Some of us recall the first Intifada. We recall the ways in which Palestinians are othered constantly in this country. But this moment takes there's a particular character of this dehumanization that runs through every institution in this country. And then there's also the political repression. So we're trying to stop this war and genocide. We are now having to reckon with the fact that they don't even see us as human. So we have to humanize ourselves to everybody. And then to top that off, we're facing backlash for when we do try to build power, challenge the government, try to take action. State repression at every level, whether it's in teachers criminalizing administrators, criminalizing teachers, or teachers criminalizing students in K through 12 classrooms. And of course, as you all very well know, in the higher ed world, the ways in which universities are criminalizing teachers and staff across the board, the ways in which the Department of Education is doing so. Then you have legislation state by state trying to criminalize Palestine solidarity. And you have the federal government normalizing that both with their policies, but also with their rhetoric. And so we as a movement and in terms of organizing are having to grapple with those three things, which is no easy task. But fortunately, we're also supported by a wider movement of people across all social justice issues, like the social justice left, social movement left, labor is with Palestine. They all understand this as a critical issue, and they are supporting and showing up and taking action in ways we haven't seen before. So the backlash that we're facing, they're facing. So what that means is the backlash that Palestine is facing is actually impacting every single progressive movement, organization, institution, issue in this country. So what does that say about the future of this country, right? And that is also the fight we are all in terms of the alienation that is being felt between the everyday people and the Biden administration. We're in a 2024 election year. I know Ahmed and I and many have been in conversations about what does this mean for our community? And obviously our community's made it clear where we are on this issue, but what does it mean for the broader social movement left and the future of this country and governance in the broadest sense of the term? And I think those are some of the ways in which we are figuring out what we can do with the rise of anti-Palestinian racism and Islamophobia. But on the flip side of that, we're seeing our parents fired up. We're seeing students fired up, from local to national, walkouts happening everywhere. They're saying that you're not listening to me. In fact, you're not only not listening to me, you're quelling my ability, you're trying to stop me from speaking out. I'm going to rise up and I'm going to reclaim space in school. I'm going to reclaim the streets. I'm going to reclaim my narrative. That's also incredible, the way in which we're seeing these conversations and actions taking place within our families and community members across the country. We're also, as you know, like our primary demand is a ceasefire. We want a permanent ceasefire. First and foremost, we need to end this genocidal war. But we're also, as US campaign and others are leading across this country, calling on our electeds to stop aiding in this genocide by stop arming Israel, period, right? So our position, our government's position on ceasefire is another thing, but the fact that they are aiding in it, the fact that they're making it possible for the Israeli government to continue this war is another. And that's a lot longer term agenda that we're already engaging in, where we're seeing conversation for the first time in history in Congress about ending, stop arming and aiding Israel, including right here in the Bay Area where I am. Hayward, the city of Hayward being the first city in the entire country to actively divest from 4 companies that are doing business with Israel. So we have an entire city that is engaging in divestment. So we're in a moment now where we're seeing ceasefire move to the next demand, which is ending US aid, and while at the same time still demanding ceasefire. And we're also calling into question the ongoing political and economic support of apartheid Israel by this government, and seeing that we as a movement, Palestinian Arabs, Muslims, and otherwise, are also joined for the first time an unprecedented record number of Jewish allies coming out and saying, Zionism doesn't speak for us, Israel doesn't speak for us, Israel doesn't keep us safe, solidarity does, right? So there's a moment and an opening here for us to unite as a broader left in this country, progressives in this country, to reshape what organizing and movement building looks like as it relates not only to Palestine, but the priorities, the political and economic priorities of this country. And collectively across the board, labor, health workers, students, Jewish allies, housing rights organizations, queer organizations, Palestinian, Arab, Muslim, Christian organizations are all taking action on every single level, engaging in every single tactic, whether it's calling your congressional leaders and then shutting down their offices because they're not listening, right? Whether it's mobilizing in the streets and shutting down freeways and highways and bridges, whether it's just doing everyday political education. Hearing from community members about the impact this war has had on them and why it's a local issue. Because of course our adversaries attempt to make this faraway thing that doesn't matter. And the numbers and stories speak for themselves. You can't turn a blind eye to the direct impact this war is having on Palestinians and Arabs in this country, let alone all people impacted by the political and economic priorities of this government, which lean heavily towards militarism and war and genocide. And we're engaging in BDS, as I mentioned, with the Hayward Resolution as one example, leading the way for all of us to start to escalate tactics as it relates to ceasefire resolutions in different municipalities. We're engaging in direct actions in unprecedented ways. People are saying we're going to have no business as usual so long as there's a genocide. And we're doing the inside-outside strategy. So at the same time, we're calling electeds, we're meeting with electeds, we're also shutting down streets and freeways, right? At the same time that we are demanding more of the US government, we're also shutting down the ports to make sure that no money gets moved. So we're international commerce is disrupted so long as a war continues. We're not allowing military vessels to leave our ports without demonstration and protest. So these are the kinds of things that we are engaged in. And to answer the second part of your question, the work that we're able to advance in this moment, the the groundswell of solidarity you're witnessing, the inspiring actions that are happening in every single place, whether it's, every time one of these war profiteers, or anytime one of these apologists, like, whether it's Kamala Harris, or we have Nancy Pelosi, or today Hillary Clinton, they will get disrupted wherever they are, right? So they're getting disrupted and being told and they're having to face directly with the constituents who are saying, you do not represent my values, you do not represent the United States and the world that I want to see, right? And so this is a moment, and this moment is only made possible because of the decades of solidarity work that's happened in this country between Palestine and other movements. It's only made possible because of that foundation that's been laid, the relationships that have been put in place between Palestine and other issues. We've said for many years now, social justice movements understand Palestine as a key issue. Now there is no doubt, there is no question that Palestine is the key issue for all social justice movements. It is the issue, right? And that is a testament not only to our solidarity work that we've done here, but the solidarity work that is actually rooted in the Palestinian tradition in Palestine. The political prisoners who read Bobby Sands, the political prisoners in Palestine who read Angela Davis, the relationships between the third world struggles in Palestine and across the world. That history is what shaped our history here and how we relate to cross-movement building. And that is what has actually laid the groundwork for what we're witnessing today. It's not a coincidence that South Africa decided to take Israel to the International Criminal Justice Court. It's not a coincidence, right, that the people who are at the receiving end of apartheid, that was also supported by the state of Israel, are the first to say, we are going to stand shoulder to shoulder with our Palestinian siblings and demand that this government be held accountable. So we're in a really unprecedented moment. And I think this moment speaks to the ongoing solidarity work that we have been a part of, humbled to be on the shoulders of, and continue to witness. And I think this is why we must all be hopeful in this moment, because what we're seeing, we've never seen before. While we're seeing the most tragic, brutal violence since my father experienced the 1948 Nakba. My father, who's now 85, is witnessing a second Nakba. My daughter, who's 9 months old, is now witnessing and being birthed and growing up and developing in a second Nakba. This will change the lives of every Palestinian, but this will change the world from here to come. And at the same time, as this tragedy is unfolding before our eyes, unprecedented groundswell of solidarity is also happening, and something that we can't take for granted, and have to understand that there is a dialectical relationship here between the two that hopefully will give birth to a new future for us all.
And I want to pause and say, I hope everyone on the call is hearing in these stories and lessons just the extraordinary work that Lara and Ahmed have done all their lives, and in community and coalition. And so I just want to pause and say thank you to both of you for what you do for the world and for being with us again. There was a lot in there, but one thing really struck me. We're at war, and I wonder if you all might think about sort of a tension of the kind of work, the necessary and extraordinary work that's being done, but a tension with work that engages what we might think of, some of us might think of as a false country, a colony that calls itself the US, that some of us feel shouldn't exist. We feel that peoples have been at war with it since it said it was the US. So not unlike ways in which people will suggest that Israel is a sort of a false country or a fiction or a colony that shouldn't exist. So there is that dimension of the political movement with which I imagine you're in solidarity or is also part of your movements. And so how do you think about the tension of this moment and the kind of the work to end the human project and the necessity of humanizing in the moment, the work to end the colony of the US and the necessity of engaging Congress. How do you all sort of move and think and work in that tension?
Well, look, I think the reality is, those of us who are Palestinian in the US, we need to make sure that we're active or most active in order to create an impact based on our positionality. And currently we're in what's known as the United States or Turtle Island, right? But we're paying taxes to this entity. We have this entity on our passport. It allows for us to travel internationally. And so actually, I think we have a responsibility to make sure that as it relates to Palestine, we're doing everything we can to limit the harm or to start to at least take the boot off of the Palestinian neck, if you would. But then as it relates to domestically, I mean, that's part of the reason that, Palestinians have been in solidarity at Standing Rock. It's part of the reason that Palestinians have been in solidarity with the land back movement. If you went to Standing Rock, during the height of sort of the encampment there, you probably saw like dozens of Palestinian flags. And it wasn't just because many folks from these communities that we organize with, such as the Red Nation and others, it wasn't just because those folks view themselves as in solidarity with Palestine as Native and Indigenous people. It was also because there were like literal caravans and groupings of Palestinians that went to sit and build in solidarity with the folks at Standing Rock. I think the reality is, we have to meet this this challenge and these contradictions head on, and be in solidarity with our Indigenous community members, and that's why they're in the coalitions that we're building, right? And so I think to the best of our ability, we're going to be in solidarity with Standing Rock, with Land Back. We're going to be teaching about settler colonialism in a way that also is able to be digested here for what happened domestically, right? When we talk about Israel, the settler colonial state, I mean, it does actually exist, right? And the United States does actually exist, even if, we, find opposition to that. But the reality is these structures do exist. And so what are we to do as citizens under these structures with responsibilities, with abilities, with mechanisms for holding the power structures accountable? How do we respond to that? So I'm glad to be in struggle with these folks to deal with these different challenges and contradictions. And I hope that we can see land back where folks are able to get their self-determination back, both on Turtle Island and in Palestine.
Yeah, I would, to echo what Ahmed said, Palestine is a land back issue. It's a land back struggle. And when we fight for Palestine, we're also fighting for right relations to the land here on Turtle Island. And the contradictions we find ourselves navigating as we engage with legislators and at the same time, fighting to decolonize Palestine is a contradiction every social movement history in the history of this world has grappled with, right? And we know how to do that. We know that we have to, address and engage in these contradictions while having a vision for what we're fighting for and be principled in the way we move and uncompromising in our principles, right? And so I think that's how we do our work. And when you brought up the colonization of this land, it made me think about what people call Thanksgiving here in this country. And every year on Thanksgiving, our Indigenous siblings organize sunrise ceremony on Alcatraz Island in San Francisco, Ramaytush Ohlone land. And every year for the last 20 odd years, I've gone to that sunrise ceremony, and we stand alongside our Indigenous siblings, not just in mourning, but to celebrate their ongoing resistance to colonialism and land theft, and to continue to fight alongside them for land back. And this year, the end of November, on Indigenous, during this sunrise ceremony, we had a delegation of AROC organized about 75 people, of a Palestinian delegation that went to Alcatraz at 4 a.m, took the ferry. We brought a few flags. We entered Alcatraz Island, and every time a person with a Palestinian flag from our delegation was seen by the organizers, they asked them to come to the center of the circle. Every time there was a Palestinian flag, they asked them to join the flags of the various native tribes, which are at the center of the ceremony. And as every year, we give a solidarity statement. And this year, they asked 3 of us to give solidarity statements. We had our elders, we had our youth, and we had our intergenerational representation of Palestine solidarity. But what was most beautiful about this ceremony this year wasn't just that we had, close to 100 people there as part of the Palestine delegation to Alcatraz. It was that Alcatraz and the indigenous ceremony on this day became an act of solidarity with Palestine. Every single speaker spoke about ceasefire. Every single speaker talked about Palestine. Indigenous flags themselves added the Palestinian flag onto their flags. And we had Depke, the Palestinian folkloric dance, as part of our presentation that morning. And the entire circle joined with Depke. What was an indigenous sunrise ceremony became an indigenous sunrise ceremony for all indigenous people from Turtle Island to Palestine. That is the kind of organizing we do. That is the kind of movement we're building. It's not that we're in solidarity with each other, that we're actually in joint struggle. We're fighting on different terrains for the same goal, we're fighting towards the same fate. We want everybody to live in dignity. We want everybody to live towards their fullest potential. We want everybody to have right relations to the land. We believe in a future where we don't have to fight between one another about whose struggle matters more than the next. It's actually one struggle, but we're fighting on different terrains. And that's the movement we're building. So when we call for an end to aid to Israel, we're actually emboldening calls to defund the police, to abolish prisons, to defeat fascism, right? We're expanding the capacity of working people to shape and determine the economic and political priorities of this society and their futures. Because we know we can't fight against apartheid and settler colonialism in Palestine without fighting economic and political and bodily violence right here in this country. So I think for us, that's quite clear. And we've made it quite clear to our broader community and our movements and the people that have trained Ahmad and I, the people we learned from and have mentored us, also understood that. And so I would imagine for days to come, this moment is only deepening that understanding, only deepening that commitment, and making it so that more and more people see this as part of their own struggle.
Thank you both for that. So this question came up in the Q&A in the chat and also in one of the original questions, thinking about ways in which people involved in educational work broadly conceived. So there's a question about K-16, but also political ed, community ed. Are there ways in which people involved in educational work can best contribute, mobilize, engage right now, either with your organizations or with other sort of calls or dimensions of the movement?
I think AROC does really wonderful work with youth in the area. So I'd love for Lara to take that one.
Well, I would say, yeah, for youth and for K through 12, we're in a moment where public education is under attack by Zionists and other right-wing forces. And so as we're focused on ceasefire, we can't turn a blind eye to what's happening in classrooms across this country, from banning books, right, to criminalizing teaching Palestine or speaking about Palestine, let alone teaching Palestine. So I'd really encourage everybody to get involved with the Coalition for Liberated Ethnic Studies, which is a national coalition. It's meant to be a resource for teachers, particularly K through 12, but also higher ed, to come together and coordinate, to share strategies and tactics, to be able to build solidarity and resource one another in this critical moment where the future of public education is at stake. Not only the question of Palestine, but we know when you attack Palestine, you're really attacking every issue as it relates to the questioning power and race, right, in this country. And I also put in the question and answer function here. There's a resource from the Middle East Children's Alliance, Teach Palestine, and it's meant to be a resource for K through 12 teachers with curriculum you can actually use in your classroom to be able to engage on this topic. And then obviously US Campaign, AROC, and so many other organizations are resources for people if they want to try to draw on these connections. But what we also like to always remind people is how you engage in this moment around political education or connecting the dots to Palestine doesn't mean you have to go out of your way to do something completely different or separate. As we've been trying to articulate throughout this webinar, Palestine is not separate from all the other critical, progressive, and social justice issues in this country. So wherever you find yourself addressing or talking about, making space for, or getting questions on issues of this moment, whether it be climate justice, racial justice, economic justice, healthcare, there's ways to connect the dots to Palestine. And we'd encourage people to find those connections rather than feeling like it's a whole separate thing, because it's not. It's definitely not for Palestinians in this country. But I would say, as Palestine is a working class issue, it's not for any working class person in this country. So there's ways in which we can draw on those connections. And lastly, it's to support people. So another way to engage and do this work well is to make sure that those who are on the front lines, who are risking their jobs, who are taking bold steps to speak out and getting targeted, that we collectively defend against that backlash, because it is important that they know when they come for one of us, they come for all of us.
I have nothing to add to that. That was exactly right.
It was beautiful. I think I'm going to encourage everyone on this call, please send questions, put them in the chat. You can send them directly to me or to host and panelists. You can put them in the Q&A. But we do have a final question here, which is sort of what the long-term aims are for your work. And you've talked a little bit about this. I wonder if there are particular mobilizations or efforts that you're working on, particular coalitions, just in general, are there things that are kind of coming forward that are really important or that you want folks to know about, particularly as they're thinking about education?
I'll just say, in a really frank, direct answer, is we've been in crisis mode. We've been in rapid response mode. Every single day we wake up just trying to figure out how are we going to get to a ceasefire. That is, we're fighting an active, ongoing genocide. And we actually haven't had the luxury to think long term, unfortunately. And we're actually taking moments only recently because of initiatives by Ahmad and others for us to take a breath and figure out, what are we thinking? What is the long game here? What are we trying to accomplish? Ultimately, our goal has always been and will be to end US aid to Israel, to isolate apartheid and Zionism, and to have freedom for Palestinians and the right of return. And that's the vision, right? That's the goal we have for our people. But in the short term, all of us need to do everything in our power on every level. And I see a question about artists. I mean, artists have shown up. There's artists for ceasefire. There's mamas for ceasefire. There's health workers for ceasefires. There's teachers for ceasefire. It's an incredible moment where everyone from what sector they're in is coming out to say, I have a role to play. I have a part to play. I have something to contribute to this movement. And I would say just keep doing that, because this moment requires all of us. And we don't want years from now to say, what could we done? What should we done? How could we have ended this genocide sooner? We need to do everything we can in our power now. So I know that's not a direct answer, but just to compel people to see the urgency of this moment around stopping this genocide as the call we must all heed, as the call we must all echo and amplify until this genocide is put to an end.
Thank you for that, Lara. The only thing I'll add, is while we're again in the midst of fighting against this genocide, I earlier talked about the connectivity between what we're witnessing now and the Nakba. And so May 15th will be the next commemoration of the Nakba. So this has been going on since 1948. So, I just want to emphasize what Lara said. Everyone has a role and the time is now. And I would find it absolutely heartbreaking for us to reach May 15, the next commemoration of the Nakba, and for this genocide to still be ongoing. So we really need an all hands on deck moment to make sure that the powers that be hear us loud and clear once and for all.
And I think for those on the call who are interested in specific campaigns that AROC and USCPR are undertaking, go to the websites. The Block the Boat campaign has been just phenomenal. So take a look at everything they're doing, and we'll drop the websites in the chat. It looks like we have a question here. The question is, I hear a lot of experience and understanding of the integration of our struggles. Deeply grateful for you both. Would it feel good for you all, or those whose voices should be in the center, to loop in with those of us helping facilitate the Indigenous Spaces and Palestine delegation at the upcoming Stop Cop City Summit, and making sure they're intentionally in the center? And that's Josh Spitzer-Resnick posed that question. So
Yeah, I'm happy to be in contact. That sounds really interesting. Thank you for offering.
Yeah, and I think that's a great example of what's needed in this moment, because there should not be a space, a convention, a meeting of any sort that completely turns a blind eye to the genocide in Gaza. And especially a progressive space, a left space, any space that's addressing or talking or discussing or strategizing around any social or economic racial justice issue. There has to be a way in which Palestine is also centered there. So whatever folks are doing and have been doing and continue to do, we thank you in advance. And I think that is the kind of joint struggle work we want to continue to push and lift up, because that's where the real work happens, is where we're actually talking about campaigns, engaging in the work, figuring out how can we show up for one another, especially in spaces that are already been curated for that type of discussion, and that we want to ensure that Palestine is not erased from that. For far too long, Palestine was erased. And we've done important work to ensure that Palestine is not erased in these progressive spaces. Unfortunately, it hasn't been erased in left spaces over time, but progressive spaces have been a little tricky for Palestine over the years. There was a progressive except for Palestine. And I think that has become much more difficult to do and accomplish in this day and age. And it's actually that much more critical that we ensure that Palestine is not exceptionalized in any way, shape, or form.
maybe while we give people a chance to write any more questions they might have, if there are any sort of last things you want to say before we close out. You've said a lot, so not necessary, but I want to make it open.
Yeah, I'll just say that, like, we were meeting as a team a year or so ago, myself and my team at US Campaign, and we started to, build our next strategic plan. You build your strategic plan every 2 to 3 years because things shift. And I remember thinking, it may take 15 or so years till we get to that ending military funding legislation, or till something like that can be real. Well, I think things are shifting, and Lara really, I think, hit home at the absolute massive nature of this movement that we're a part of right now. And so the same way that she was talking about previous movements being unrealistic at those times, we need to shake ourselves up and recognize the moment that we're in and the possibilities that are presenting themselves. So even myself, when I said to my team maybe a few months back or last year that it would be a 15 or so year struggle to end military campaign and military aid to Israel, I think that's been accelerated. And it's been accelerated because people like each of you who are tuned into the Zoom, people in our families, people in our networks, they're figuring out how to take action and to get plugged into this movement. So I guess my final point that I'm really just marinating on right now is the fact that our liberation is within reach, and it can happen sooner than we thought it would initially. And I want us to grasp that, like, and grab a hold of that and not let go, because it feels very real to me right now.
Lara, do you want to jump in at all?
No, I think Ahmed said it beautifully.
That was a beautiful. And so, Lara and Ahmed, in the midst of war, in the midst of crisis, in the midst of genocide, thank you for taking time to share with us your experience and expertise to, I think, inspire us, to push us. I learned a lot. I took pages and pages of notes. I'm very grateful. And please everyone join me in thanking them for being with us today.